right, guys, chapter 4, the grasshopper. So if you guys remember yesterday, the gnat Judy had to leave the gnat because the gnat was too small of a ship. And the British Navy realized that the Japanese were winning and they needed to start sending bigger, stronger, more powerful ships. So now Judy is on the grasshopper, a new boat. In June 1939, most of the Gnat's crew, including me, were transferred to the HMS Grasshopper. The Grasshopper was a good ship, newer and shinier than the Gnat. But I missed all my comfortable old nooks and crannies. Even worse, Law and Bonnie, my two best friends, stayed behind as part of a small crew on the Gnat. I had always been good at finding new humans when I needed to, but I was sick of all the constant changes, so she's starting to miss her friends. Will I ever be as happy here as I was on my old ship, I wondered. I had just started to get used to my new ship when Adolf Hitler, the German chancellor, invaded Poland, which led England and France to declare war on Germany. It was only a matter of time before Japan and Germany teamed up, so we were given orders to sail to England's stronghold in the Pacific, Singapore, with a stop in Hong Kong along the way. Okay, so that's kind of a lot of information, but Germany, right here, invaded. So they went into the country of Poland and they took over, which isn't a good thing. So they knew that it wouldn't be long before Japan and Germany would team up. So Japan and Germany would team up together. And once that happened, they'd be stronger. So it looks like they're going to Singapore. So remember, they've been in China. They've been here in China, in the big country of China. They're going to go to Singapore down here, the island of Singapore. I believe Great Britain at that time was the ruler of Singapore. Singapore was one of its countries, or one of its, what do they call them? Well, Singapore was under the rule of England. And so this area here was really important in the war because they could be safe here in Singapore, and then they could send their ships up to China and to Japan to fight. So it sounds like they're heading to Singapore now. All right. The Grasshopper and two other new gunboats, the HMS Scorpion and the HMS Dragonfly, headed to open seas. So they headed to start sailing to Singapore. Before this, I had spent most of my life on the river. As choppy and rough as those waters could be, they were nothing compared to the wild waves on the South China Sea. So let's see. They were likely coming right here on the South China Sea. So they're coming from like Shanghai and places in China, and they're going to sail this way. You see that right here? They're going to sail this way on the South China Sea. And those waters are a lot rougher and bumpier and lots more waves. I spent the first leg of the trip losing much lunch. Losing my lunch. So she was getting sick, because sometimes when you're in rough water like that, you get seasick and you vomit. Seasickness is no joke, and when you're a ship's dog, it's especially embarrassing. The crew tried to force me to eat and drink and exercise. Just leave me alone, I whimpered. I'm not getting out of bed. She feels like you do when you get the stomach flu, just yucky. But they wouldn't leave me alone. Eating was out of the question, but they were able to get me to drink and walk on the deck. Slowly, I began to get my sea legs, and soon I was able to eat, and I never got seasick again. So getting your sea legs means that you get used to being on the rough water and your body adjusts, and then you don't vomit anymore. Even though war raged in Europe and in China, you'd hardly know it in Singapore. There was an active naval presence, but there was also lots of fun to be had until I found my own private war. It happened, as bad things seem to, when I was off the ship. I went on a visit to the family of a local official with 3 children who loved dogs. Have I mentioned how awesome kids are to play with? But while I was away, my sailors got into trouble in the form of a monkey named Mickey the monkey. While I was off playing, the Grasshopper's new crew agreed to keep the monkey on board while his ship was on duty somewhere in the Pacific. The minute I got home, I realized why Mickey's men didn't want him around when they were on duty. He was a menace. A menace is a problem. He was naughty. Mickey took one look at me and jumped on my back. I'm not a horse, I barked. I jumped and I bucked and I leaped, but that stupid monkey didn't let go. I had no choice but to demand help. I sat down and howled until the monkey jumped off my back and threw an arm around my neck. Oh dear. The sailors, instead of helping me, thought it was hilarious. Stop laughing, I howled at the crew. It's not funny. Thankfully, I figured out pretty quickly that the annoying ball of fur was attached to a sort of metal leash. So I simply ran out of its range. So the monkey was on a leash. So if Judy ran far enough away, she wouldn't have to be attacked by the monkey anymore. I did my best to avoid the screeching thing for the next few days, staying far enough away that he couldn't dive onto my back again. And okay, I'll admit it, I may have used that distance to drive Mickey a little crazy. That's what I was doing when George White came on board. Coxswain White joined the Grasshopper at Keppel Harbor in Singapore. He marched up the gangway to report for duty, only to have Mickey the monkey dive bomb his head. So Mickey the monkey came and jumped on this man's head. Mickey snatched White's sailor cap and jumped up and down, taunting him. Sailors nearby burst into laughter. Let's see how you handle this, sailor. White was up to the test. He grabbed Mickey, snatched his cap back, and tossed that cheeky monkey onto the deck. That's when White spotted me. You're laughing your head off, aren't you? He asked me. I am, I barked. From then on, White was one of my special humans. I had a new ship, a new special human, and Mickey would soon be put off the Grasshopper forever. Life in Singapore was going to be good, if only the war would stay far away. And for 18 months it did. So 18 months is about a year and a half. So from one birthday to the next birthday is a year, and then another half a year, 18 months. Okay. We shuttled between Singapore and Hong Kong, but tensions between England and the Japanese Empire continued to grow. Japan wanted the food, minerals, and oil in Singapore, Malaysia, and the Dutch East Indies, and was willing to go to war with any country standing in her way. That included England and the United States. So apparently these countries of Singapore, where they are, Malaysia, which is another little country, and the Dutch East Indies, more little islands, had a lot of oil and food and minerals, and the Japanese wanted those. And the English, the Great Britain or England, and the United States was standing in their way, wasn't allowing them to take over those countries or those islands. At 0400 hours on December 8th, 1941, World War II officially came to the Pacific. So that's when war was declared. It was still December 7th across the international dateline in Hawaii. And you maybe have heard about this, when Japanese warplanes dropped bombs on the United States Naval Base in Pearl Harbor. At the same time, bombs rained down on Singapore, the Philippines, and other islands in Southeast Asia. Japan also landed troops in Malaysia to try to push into Singapore by land. The attacks were a complete surprise. And when that happened, well, they'll probably tell you this. Hang on. I barked and barked as the planes approached, and my guys ran for the anti-aircraft guns. But gunboats didn't have the speed or the gunpowder to put up much of a fight. We weighed anchor and pulled out to sea. England's real battleships, the HMS Prince of Wales and the HMS Repulse, set sail for Jamaica to come and help. But 2 days later, a Japanese submarine spotted them. Bombs soon rained down on them from the skies while torpedoes hit them from under the sea. and in just 2 hours, England lost any ability to stop the Japanese in the Pacific. America's fleet was also destroyed in the first round of attacks. So at this point, the Japanese Navy is winning this war in the Pacific. They've sunk the American ships and they have sunk the British ships. We were at war, but how would we fight back? Our land forces were being overrun, so all of the armies and soldiers on land. And the grasshopper, along with the dragonfly and the scorpion, spent days zigzagging across the sea or creeping along the coast, hoping our small size would make us hard to see and easy for the Japanese bombers to ignore. So they're being hit by submarines from underneath and by planes from up above. And so these smaller ships, like the ship that Judy is on, is trying to stay safe and be stealthy, be kind of sneaky. We moved freely only at night because it's too dark to see them, searching for enemy targets to attack or British troops to rescue. My dog ears became more and more important, letting the gunships know when warplanes were near, because she could hear the planes before the humans could. One night, British soldiers who were battling the Japanese on land got cut off from the rest of the troops. There were 1,500 men stuck in the jungle who needed to be rescued. Creeping through the jungle at night in search of them, I knew not to bark. I did nudge our leader's arms when I sensed the Japanese were near, and we all stopped until the danger passed. I didn't even scratch my neck, knowing that my jingling collar would give us away. If you've ever heard a dog or watched a dog scratch its collar, the little tags that they have jingle and make noise, but she knew not to do that. We found the troops and led them out of the jungle and onto the gunships, right under the Japanese soldiers' noses. Take that, you kickers. Another time, though, on a similar rescue by the grasshopper and the dragonfly, we ran into trouble. We had found our soldiers that they were trying to rescue, and were nearly back to the ships when the Japanese spotted us. There was a short battle while we got the British soldiers on board, but a sailor from the Dragonfly named Les Cyril was shot in the leg. He made it back to the ship and later to the hospital in Singapore. I visited him and all the other wounded soldiers whenever our ship's medic, that's the doctor, made the trip. Get well soon, friends, I thought. Keeping the troops' spirits up became a more important part of my job. So they're starting to feel sad and scared and upset. And so part of her job is to make them feel happy, especially as the war news got worse. By the end of January, most of the area was in Japanese hands, so Japan was winning. Singapore, Britain's stronghold, was under siege, was being attacked, and on the verge of collapse. Not good. Everywhere I looked, there was rubble. So rubble is, broken buildings and things that are just not put together anymore. That's rubble. Refugees streamed toward the harbor, hoping to find a way off the island before the Japanese arrived. So they don't want to stay in Singapore anymore because it's not safe there. So people are trying to get off the island so that they can stay safe and keep their families safe. By early February 1942, the first Japanese troops entered Singapore. We were forced to evacuate the island or leave the island, and the only escape was by sea. Everyone in the city, soldiers, government workers, the English, the people from England, and the Chinese families who worked for them, was faced with finding a place on a ship or being made prisoner of the Japanese. Bombs fell while people crowded the pier to fight for a spot on anything that would float, from the smallest fishing boats to yachts and gunboats. So everything that would float, they were trying to rescue people and get them out of Singapore to get them to safety. On February 13th, the Grasshopper became home to a lot of frightened mothers and children. Each person was met with a cup of tea and a piece of chocolate by my good friend George White. That's his human right now. That's Judy's human, not her human. My job was to wag my tail, lick little fingers, and bark hello. Welcome to the Grasshopper, I told them. You're safe here. It was after midnight before we were finally able to leave the harbor. I found a spot between two of the children and kept them calm until they were able to fall asleep. I tried to sleep myself, but my ears were listening for the sounds of Japanese warplanes so I could warn my sailors if they came near. The grasshopper and the dragonfly planned to sail at night and anchor near one of the hundreds of small volcanic islands during the day. With luck, we'd make it to Java and larger ships that could take us safely to India or Australia, far away from the Japanese war machine. But as I've already warned you, remember when I read the prologue at the start of the story, luck wasn't on our side. All right, that's the end of chapter 4. We'll talk to you probably tomorrow.